So I've been putting off making this palette for a super long time. Originally, I thought I wouldn't have enough clay to make this palette, but I thought, I really need to do this. I gotta try. Now, I don't know if you know this, but since the COVID pandemic, stuff like polymer clay has been super hard to find, like ridiculously hard. I have looked everywhere for this 3 and some pound box of clay, and I just can't get it in at all. Which kind of sucks because I do want to keep making palettes in the future. Like, this is really fun, and it's not like I'm doing it to just make them. I needed to do this because I'm running out of mixing space. My other 2 palettes that I've made, they work beautifully. I got lots of mixing room, but only for like one major project at a time. And I usually don't have just one project on the go, so I really needed the mixing space. So I started making this out of necessity, like I made my very first palette. I also didn't like how much pigment I was losing in my wash water. So yeah, I didn't like losing all this pigment in my wash water, and I started using the 2 empty wells I have on my second palette to kind of brush off my pigment into it, and it was working so good. And so instead of filling the skull palette with my tubes, I'm going to be using the leftover pigments in my brush from my projects to fill the wells. And so I'll end up with these amalgamation of colors, like pre-mixed colors sort of thing. And I think that'll be really fun to work with, and it'll be a way to save some of my pigments and experiment with some unique mixes. So because this is my 3rd palette, I think I'm starting to figure out what I like in my handmade palettes versus what I don't like in my handmade palettes. You see, the first one I made, the wells have like nice hard edges, and it makes it really nice to brush the pigment back into the well. It really cleans the brush nicely, whereas my second palette, the edges are a lot rounder, and it's a lot harder to clean the brush off back onto the palette. So we're at the part of the video now where I'm actually shaping the clay, and I just want to point out that these teeth took so long to make. It took a lot of work to get them to the right shape, and like the more you work it, the more it like lifts up, and I kind of wanted them to be even. So you see I'm like carving away a lot of the stuff and trying to shape it all again. I had bought these clay tools, and I found I only used one of them, and I only used it for like literally making that edge of the teeth. Otherwise, I used my hands the entire time. Now, for the eyes and nose, I should have rolled out my clay a lot thinner, because I'm fairly certain that I cut off at least half of the quantity that I had put on. It was just so thick and so much. Here I am, I'm just smoothing the outside, making sure that it's attached to the bottom and you can't see the line. Now here's a really important part. I'm using my rolling pin to flatten that edge, because like I said, if the edge is round, I find it really hard to brush my pigment back off into the palette. And it also makes sure that all my clay is the same height or very close to the same height. And then I can go in with my knife like you see here and trim off the excess. When I started working the eyes, I also realized that I had used way too much clay, and I did have to cut off quite a bit of that as well. Getting everything the right shape took a lot of mucking around. And then I realized that I didn't like the shape of it, and so I elongated the top of my palette. And it was just as easy as just adding more clay to it and rolling it in and smoothing it all out and making those lines disappear. That's what I really like about polymer clay. I find it so easy to work with. At this point, I'm cutting away even more clay. I'm evening up all the shapes, and I decided I wanted to make some low spots in this well. In my other palettes, I had used my fingers to kind of make little fingerprints, but on this one, I actually like carved away these 3 spots and made some dips in the cheeks just so I had different mixing zones, because this palette actually has like a lot of mixing space compared to my other 2 palettes. And I don't know how many times I've had to rework that nose, but it was definitely giving me a lot of problems. Every time I rolled it, it was like, it's too thick, and I had to carve away even more. But I ended up getting it how I liked it, and I could move on to baking. And here it is baked. It looks a lot different. It baked really well. I didn't overbake it. There was a couple of burrs that I had to remove. But overall, I'm really pleased with how this whole thing turned out. So I'm using Sculpting's glaze to seal this thing. I had a commenter and subscriber, Lady B. Dolores Whitney, message me on my first polymer palette video saying how she uses Polycrylic, which is a Minwax brand, and she doesn't get any staining from it. Now, I didn't go out and buy this brand. I just stuck with the stuff I had. But I will mention that the Sculpting glaze does stain. My first palette only has 2 coats of glaze, and a couple of the pigments were actually removing the glaze from small areas. So I did 3 on my second palette and this third palette as extra peace of mind. Now this is the part I was most excited for, was the actual using of my new palette. I just threw on some random colors that I thought would look good and decided to just make some blobs for future pareidolia use. It's kind of fun getting used to a new palette, like especially one with such a weird shape like this. Like, I found myself brushing my paintbrush off in places I wasn't expecting to brush my paint off. And I also really enjoyed seeing my dips working how I wanted them to work. It was all coming together. It was beautiful. I hope polymer clay becomes more available soon, because I really have a lot of fun making these palettes, and I have so many ideas of different designs that I want to do. And maybe in the future I might sell some of these, because I don't think I'll need as many as that I want to make, but I still enjoy making them and playing with them. And like, who can say no to a happy skull like that? Like, when I paint with this thing, I'm so happy to see it, because it looks so happy to see me. It's like, hey, we're gonna go painting. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making it. And if you want to know why I'm making all these blobs, go check out some of my pareidolia videos. I have some playlists made, or you can just scroll through my content. We've got lots of stuff going on, and I'll see you next time.